Um, so we're here, and I'm so excited to be able to interview the Dr. Joy James. I know everyone else is excited, but this is a really important conversation for me as I continue to think with your work and just sit with the profound interventions that you have made as not only a political critical theorist, but also an organizer. So I just want to introduce you, read your bio. Dr. James is the author of Shadowboxing, Representation, Politics, Transcending the Talented 10th, Black Leaders and Resisting State Violence, Radicalism, Gender and Race. Also warfare in the American Homeland, slave narratives and contemporary prison writing, States in Confinement. She's also co-authored The Black Feminist Reader with Dr. T. Sharpley-Whiting, and she is a professor at Williams College. And we're just excited to be here in this moment because I've been intentionally wanted to construct my questions today around your work discursively with the other contemporary social movements and intellectual traditions that have been brewing in this contemporary moment, not only in the academy, but also in digital spaces and digital organizing spaces. Your constructions offer critical interventions to not only Black feminism, political theology, Black male studies, and political theory, but within intellectual traditions of political education that is happening on the ground. So we can get into the questions. I want to give you an opportunity to just say something, introduce yourself, and then we'll move forward right into the questions.
Okay, so thank you. Can I call you Rebecca?
Yeah.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Roberto and Laura, for organizing. There's a lot in my mind, and I really want people to ask questions because I see this as a collective conversation, because even though the academy is structured for hierarchy, there's no one individual who has the answers pretty much to anything. But collectively, all the kind things that Rebecca said about me, that came from the intellectualism, the commitment, the agape of political people who are committed to changing the world so that people could live longer and with decency within it. We put in the chat, or we will soon, perhaps you might want to Google it yourself, the poem, Please Call Me by My True Name, which is by Thich Nhat Hanh, and he transitioned recently. So he is the Buddhist priest who met with Martin Luther King and helped to dialogue and to present the case that we needed to oppose the imperial war against the Vietnamese, but also save our own lives here in the United States, right? And so this interconnectedness of beauty that loves and guides and teaches us, appearing and disappearing, crosses all types of boundaries. So it'll be interesting to see how the academy supports that interconnectedness or how it severs it.
Well, I think you opened us up straight to our first question, which really is just a question. I just want to jump right into this question so that we can get to the work that actually engages what your work does and your critical interventions. So I wanted to open with a question that just represents the title of our talk, about the university and how it de-radicalizes social movements. But I want to contextualize this question to not focus so much on the intention of the university, but more of the intent of how people assume coming to the university can in some way be a type of radical move or some type of organizing from the inside type of political commitment, and how we can speak to not only those dynamics of survival, like coming to the university for one's survival, healthcare, having housing on campus, things of that nature, right? Or professors just being able to have a job, but also what can be said about critical Black thought in the academy, like how we can rigorously talk about the things that we are intervening or the things that are really critical to our work within the confines of the academy. So if you could just speak to that question.
Sure. All of those are important questions, so I'll try to address, but maybe part of this is the origin story, right? Why did you come to the academy in the first place? Or why are you coming to the academy? And then when do you leave and how do you leave? I mean, the academy is tricky because it's a zone that on some level we can retreat into in order to think with structure and support, right, from the edifice. But it can also, it's a cheesy cliche, but we said it decades ago when I was growing up. It can eat your lunch. It's like the bully. I'm going back decades. I don't know how people, you guys go out and buy food or whatever, and there's a lot of people who don't access the food. But the whole thing about the bully within the school, right, has free license to extract from you. And there's no real protection against the bullies. So what happens with the entire structure has or expresses aspects of bullying. Like you come with ideas, you come with passion, you come with commitments. But if the academy, and I'm not saying it is, right? Just you decide, if the academy can often function as a zone of extraction, then you're bringing gifts to it that can be taken from you. And sometimes it's just exhausting, like you give up. Like I had this brilliant idea for a paper or a dissertation or something like that, and I'm emotionally invested, right? And then people whittle it down or they consume it. I mean, because it's edible, like, oh, I could use this in my own research, or maybe we could put you on a poster, or maybe we could take your idea and put it on a poster, or maybe we could, create a course around it. So you said I could call you Rebecca. So Rebecca, this thing about critical Black thought, how do we know when it's actually critical and not a commodity? So our entrance into the academy, like if I did the whole historical thing about the talented 10th, the concept was popularized by W.B. Du Bois in Souls of Black Folks, which I believe came out in 1903. And then later he repudiated it. But it was engineered by white philanthropists that needed to contain the Black desire, not just to learn, but to be free, right? So you can learn, but you may not be learning strategies to be free. But organically in our communities, we learn how to be free or how to navigate so that we can survive, an anti-Black or hostile world. So I've said this before, like our premier HBCUs, and I'm glad you're from HBCU, our premier HBCU, Spelman and Morehouse. I mean, Spelman is named after Rockefeller, Laura Spelman, and Morehouse is named after Henry Morehouse, who is a white philanthropist. And the point was that this talented 10th, which was going to be educated, would lead the Black mass, not towards rebellion for freedom. And the rebellion comes in different forms. It can just be how you love, right? How you write, what kind of poetry you read or give to the world. But rebellion tracks away from consumption. It tracks towards community. But once you create this veneer, this I don't want to call it overseer, because then I'm stealing from Malcolm, right? But once you get this, field house dichotomy, and the academy is the only house that could, give you that stamp of approval that you can be an official leader, then how is that not following, Spelman as the Rockefeller and Morehouse as the philanthropist? So is it still critical Black studies when it's only engineered inside the big house? Or is it critical Black studies if it also emanates from our communities, but not to produce commodities that the big house can put on the shelf or the conveyor belt? Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I'm so glad that you contextualized what you were saying within the framework of historically Black colleges and universities, because I remember in the Bronx, right? And there was this like organizing group called AUC Shut It Down. And within this like Black elite, institution, the merging of Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta University. And that's where I met like organizers like Deshaun Harrison, you're familiar with. And so we realized that the question is so interesting, because when we got to the university, it was actually being in there that cultivated our politic, being in this group of trans and queer folks who were critiquing Title IX policies, sexual assault cases that were happening on campus. It was being in the university that was organizing this type of like resistance toward the university. But then it was also because we were in the university that we realized how the university was actually parasitic upon this idea of resistance, right? We're in Atlanta, it's the Martin Luther King legacy, and then there's the Atlanta student movement. And so what you have is like like these ideas of like, oh, the protest, you're supposed to protest within the university. It's what makes us democratic. It's what makes us pluralistic, right? And what we realized was like, actually, what we're critiquing is anti-Blackness, which the university can't actually deliver on, right? Like a policy or a transition away from the way that queerphobia, fat phobia, sexual assault is happening here. But we are also building this type of insurgency by being students here who don't have like money to pay our tuition and fees, don't have housing. So it really leads me to the next question that I want to talk to you about as it relates to revolution as a more spiritual formation, as opposed to the practical implications of it, right? In your two more recent articles entitled New Bones and Airbrushing Revolution for the Sake of Abolition, you make an important distinction between revolution and abolition, while outlining the ways that neoliberalism distorts revolutionary tactics with structural reforms. So can you speak to this distinction between revolution as a demand for the end of anti-Black predation, period, versus abolition or even like voting rights as kind of more pragmatic formations that limit and fail to contend with predation? And then in addition, can you explain how this American democracy or celebrity or neoliberal activism kind of represents itself as like a freedom movement, but it distorts our ability to know when something revolutionary is happening or when a movement is being infiltrated, based upon what you were saying with critical Black thought, like when do we know that it's happening, or when do we know it's being commodified? So maybe you could just speak to this distinction between revolution and abolition.
I am, but I'm going to have to, oh, there's an echo. I'm going to, okay, I'm going to try, or I'm going to have to start taking notes. So the concept, again, I'm always back in the community, right? Let me back up. When you say, how do you get to academy? My mother told me when I was 12, 13 that I couldn't do a 9-to-5 job because I don't listen. So I had to figure out a way if I'm going to be a waitress, which is fine. I've been a waitress, I've done everything, right? But I need to figure out a gig where I wouldn't continuously get fired, right? Because I'd be like, oh, that doesn't sound right. I'm not doing it. It's like, goodbye. So this is in part how I ended up in the academy. So I just want to be clear, right? I mean, when you hear my critique, I mean, part of it is because it's to pay my bills. I didn't go to the academy to be enlightened. I love to read, I love to learn, I love to think. And sometimes, you know, for the younger people, especially for the teachers here, that is how children survive environments that are not always child friendly. So I grew up on military bases, and I grew, you know, the last stop was going to be Texas, which is just the most interesting state in terms of predatory behavior and gun violence, like across the, you know, all the counties, you know, and then, you know, distill down to home life and figure it out, right? So how do we save or preserve ourselves? Sometimes we retreat into thought. Sometimes we retreat into literature. Sometimes we retreat into ideas. And since we find those to be a form at times of respite, if not salvation. I used to climb into tree houses in Texas and just read for hours and just show up at home when it was dinner time, right? Maybe this becomes the attraction of the academy because maybe we think it's our treehouse. It is a sanctuary. That's not really how it functions, right? So if it's a state university, it is an extension of the government. I've said that repeatedly. If it's a private corporation, like the places I've been teaching the last decades, right? It is literally capital, right? Especially at the highest forms because they're multi-billionaire. I mean, the entities have endowments, they have stock investment portfolios, right? That they're never going to lose because they're going to fight the right cause. It's about preservation, right? Of edifices or structures that we don't control. So back to the source of the dichotomy or my recognition, it didn't come from text, it didn't come from the university. I went in November 2019 to the refounding of the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression in Chicago, right? And Chicago's a complicated mixed bag of radical struggle and intense police repression. So if you say, Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, December 4th, 1969, 4 a.m., I mean, that's when the Chicago police, engineered with the FBI assassinates our leaders, right? And then we can fast forward, not saying that the current Black lesbian mayor functions in the same, modality, right? But she also is not Lori Lightfoot enabling or empowering an intellectual, spiritual, or political stance where our communities can survive predation. I mean, if we survive, it's because we engineer it ourselves. The academy never said, oh, I have a blueprint for you. That's not what it does. But it'll take our blueprints and then turn them into texts or documentaries or syllabi or something like that. So in November 2019, I go with a research assistant who's a student, and I hear Frank Chapman, who is older African-American who was incarcerated, but who was out of prison or got out through the National Alliance Against Racism, Political Repression. So what is that organization? It formed out of Angela Davis's Defense Committee after she was acquitted in June 1972, sort of opened shop in late 72 or early 1973. The co-directors were Angela Davis, her mother, Sally Davis, and Charlene Mitchell, a Black communist leader. And it was Mitchell who told me in the 90s to go into the Schomburg. Sorry, it's going to take me a while to get there, but I'll get there. To go to the Schomburg and research W.B. Du Bois and read all his memoirs and why he repudiated the Talented 10th. So I think Mitchell, who's almost 90 now, right, saw the trajectory that the academy, the Talented 10th, would be hired, by white institutions and leveraged to be a sort of managerial elite over the rest of us. But Chapman is not an academic. He's someone who survived decades in prison, years in prison. I'm not sure the amount. He's someone who knew Fred Hampton's family. He was someone who was a militant and loved the people. So Davis comes to give the keynote, leaves, I guess, to go to, there's another conference at Harvard the next day. I stay for the extension of the whole thing. It is the second day after the keynote that Frank Chapman, says, maybe he'll say now, I didn't say it, but anyway, I was there. He says, I'm not an abolitionist. I'm a revolutionary, but I will work with abolitionists. And I was like, the lights go on or off, or they're flickering. It's like, wait, there's a clear distinction between the two. And the people who were incarcerated, who organized on the streets against Chicago, that had a Black ops site like the CIA does, like around the world, where they just take people to torture, predominantly Black, over years. John Burge, right? He went to prison for like white collar crime, but he was leading a ring of Chicago police who would pick up Black people. They need somebody to confess to a crime to make their numbers look good. They would take them to a Black ops site away from the precinct and waterboard them, put shock electrodes on their testicles, men and Black women, till they confess to crimes they didn't do. Chicago is tough, not just because of gun violence on the street. It's just tough because their cops are in another zone of predatory violence, right? If you can kick in Fred Hampton's door, kill Mark Clark, Fred Hampton, and claim they shot back at you, and it takes people years to figure out that was a lie. You have the immunity, you have the impunity, you have the power to pull that off. So when Chapman says, no, abolitionism is here, revolutionary struggle is here, but I will work with them, I'm like, wait, which one am I? And then it's like, okay, I don't think I'm a revolutionary. Then and I'm not. I never said I was. I just said I know them, some of them, right? But then it's like, okay, I'm gonna be an abolitionist, but what kind of abolitionist? The abolitionists who will listen to revolutionaries, especially as they age and die in prison or out of prison, or the young ones from Ferguson who end up in burning cars, or, there was another mother there. There's a lot of us who are mothers or parents or whatever. There was, I'll end with this, but this is the one that shook me. It wasn't the keynote from academics. It wasn't even Chapman startling me like, oh man, I was thinking incompletely about this. These are distinct entities, revolution, abolition. It was when I went into a side room the next day, and there's a Black mother who was a leader in Ferguson, but lived elsewhere. And she starts to talk about her young son, who's not even a radical revolutionary. He's studying to pass the exam to be a real estate agent. And she walks outside because the dog's barking, and she finds her son hanging from a tree. And how does the mother read it? It's because she engaged in a revolutionary struggle around Ferguson that she became a target. But rather than come for the mother, you come for the child. I mean, if you really want to break somebody, come for the child, right? And so she can't even complete the talk. And the father stands up. And this is also the weird, dichotomy with our genders going on right now. Like there's some kind of war going on, like this gender war. It's like, we have time for this. I mean, fascism is next door, but okay, whatever. We're just going to go through our cycles till we like confront structural predation, right? But the father takes over because the mother has to leave because she's sobbing. She can't complete the story. And the father, though, for me, he speaks, and they're both intellectuals, of course, but he speaks in the voice almost like of giving a weather report. Because how do you keep from breaking down? We numb the full range of our emotions and our rage. But he completes the story. And then later, I'll go out and I'll hug the mother and like, can I do anything? But I'm trained as an academic. What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to share your story. Maybe I'll write about it. But am I engaged on the level, right, of strategizing? And I'll say it, confrontation, that the predator as hunter has to step down, even if it's only for a moment, that we get a reprieve. So how do I know what I know? Because when I can, I go into the community, and the community will tell me what is real. Do I mess it up later when I write? Yeah, of course. I'm an academic. But I'm not so emotionally involved in academia that I can't tell when I'm spinning and when I'm telling the truth.
Right, period. I love that you ushered in a conversation about mothers participating in struggle, because it kind of leads me to the next question that I have for you, that I want to kind of contextualize within the talk and what we're in the platform political theology, right? And political theology being the framework by which we then start talking about God's activity in the world, or we talk about the political implications of the theological framework. When we turn to like works of James Cone, what do these Christological things mean in light of our struggles, right? So I want to first contextualize it with a talk that you gave in a keynote entitled "Until the Next Uprising." You discussed the theological implications of state violence and how the state functions as divine through a godlike complex. And this godlike complex is articulated by Black mothers who have lost their children to the state and demand the state bring back the child it murdered. You state in your keynote, quote, "If the state seeks to act like a god and take life, then it should function as a god and resurrect life. If it cannot, then it is not a god, it is not Pharaoh, and its laws are not legitimate when they are predatory." And I thought this was such an important quote, because on the one hand, it's like, yes, that's what we do as organizers. We make demands, right? We make demands of the state. We make the demands for the state to deliver on. And the implications of making demands to the state is an assumption that we believe that the state will deliver our demands, right? But the way that you contextualized it was kind of in a subvertive way. Like, we actually don't believe that you have the capacity to bring back life, and therefore this godlike complex is problematic, right? It's just predatory. But on the other hand, I thought this was interesting because it reminded me of my mother when we used to not be able to like pay bills and be facing evictions, and my mother would pray, and she would say in her prayers, "I put a demand on God," right? "I put a demand on God to deliver and, make sure these bills are paid. I'm not asking you, this is what you promised me." And so when I heard you say this quote, I was like, yeah, forget the state. What does it mean to make that demand to God as a political theologian to say that if you're going to take life, then you should also resurrect it. And what are the implications for political theology to contend with anti-Blackness and the theological implications of anti-Blackness as a God who has the capacity to take life, but we do not see an intervention on anti-Black suffering. We don't see the ways in which God is resurrecting Black life. We only see the ways in which God is making space, or the way that theology is allowing a vindication of Black life to be taken without any type of repercussions. So I wanted to know, what would you say as a demand for political theology to take up this tension between if we sit in the James Cone tradition, a cross that gets redemption, but a lynching tree that does not. There's no redemption on the lynching tree. Like, what would you say to this intervention as it relates to struggle, anti-Blackness, the mothers in the movement, and this demand to bring back the life you take?
So again, I start with the origin because it's what grounds me, or at least helps ground me a little bit. So I first heard I first started to think about this statement, right? Because we've been making, that statement's been made for centuries, right? It's just not, we don't always hear it. It's not always written down in what we read. But it was working with mothers and then ending up in Brazil and Colombia, working with mothers who's, mostly it's son, but also daughters as well, right? Have been killed or murdered by police forces. And hearing of one mother's rebellion in Brazil, of when they offered, as they do, they always come. I mean, if they're not doing the godlike thing, they're doing the insurance policy thing, right? Like, we killed your kid, we're sorry, here's a package deal we can offer. And it's monetary, because that's all they have. I mean, it's material, it's not spiritual. So, you bring the mother after you've disappeared the son in Brazil and dismembered them. And I mean, the kind of violence in Brazil, it's on another level. I mean, there's serious violence in the US, but the way in which, from my interaction brief with Brazilians, the impunity before Bolsonaro, during Bolsonaro, and probably after, is we have the highest incarceration rate in the globe per capita in terms of US. They have the highest police killings of civilians. And they also have the largest Black population, right, outside of the continent. So the mothers brought in and say, okay, we're not going to tell you because nobody ever acknowledges the crime, but we're sorry about what happened to your son, as if it was, what, a lightning bolt came down? No, man, it was your people, right? But here's what we're going to offer: basketball program, scholarship in their name. Like, they go to the checklist, and the mother's like, no, bring back the son, which is an impossible political ask. And so I started paying attention. Oh, you ask the state for what it cannot deliver, right? Because what do you care about more than life? There's nothing more valuable than life. Don't settle for some secondary, tertiary, like, here's like a sweepstake car, or, buy a new house. All those are important, but it's like life itself, right? And that's always the threat. Why don't we rebel? Because we would like to stay alive and be able to eat, so we go in the academy, we do other things. But life is the gold standard, or not gold, platinum, whatever you want to call it. Nothing matters more than life. So if they kill your kid, you say, okay, you could pull that one off now, like, return the kid. And if they cannot, then I say, why am I talking to you? Anything else you offer, name a school after it doesn't matter, right? It's like, for me, my go-to is always Mamie Till Mobley. Once you kill, you murder, you torture, and I would see that as a sexual assault, which nobody talks about as well, because it's a male, frame, a 14-year-old boy. There's nothing holy except for your love and rage. That's why you can have an open casket funeral of a mutilated teen and totally, disturb the mortician when he like, let me clean it up. I'm like, no. And of course he did, like, put some things back together. But this is how you can violate every rule of decorum under theology or politics. What is a ceremonial burial? An open casket funeral for the teen you murdered. And so since you cannot bring them back alive, I will imprint with my love and rage their memory on the nation and the globe, which is what she did when the photographs circulated. So back to the Brazilian mother, she can't pull that one off, but her refusal becomes the honor of the child who was supposed to preside over your burial decades later. And again, I say this is like Orlando Patterson under Slavery and Social Death, the whole concept of natality. They keep rupturing the timeline for us. We're supposed to grow old. Our children are supposed to attend. And, you know, that has some good things. Maybe not so good things to say about us, right? But at least we tried, right? But when you violate not just individual families, but whole families within the carceral framework, right, of the state, because they're imprinted with like the sign of Blackness, then time doesn't work for us the way it works for other people. Honor doesn't work for us. And the state can take life, but it can't return it. So the state doesn't work for us. If the state could resurrect the people it destroys, even the ones who still breathe, but they're tortured in prison, they're in Rikers. Khalif Browder, right? You say he stole a backpack, then later you said he didn't. Then he commits suicide years later, a couple years later, once he gets out of Rikers, because you hold him. Because what, he doesn't have $50 or $500 for bail. But look at the state now. The state is not just a white edifice. Who's the mayor of New York City? It's Eric Adams, former Black cop. I can't remember the name, but who's the new police commissioner? It's a Black woman. So, I mean, for me, we respond to signs and symbols. And that a lot is what politics is. And it's a lot about theology. And when you mix them together, you get political signs and theological symbols, right? We would have to unveil that, unmask it, and respond to our needs. And our needs are to survive with dignity, to have a roadmap to freedom, and not to genuflect to a state that cannot restore life, but only take it.
But what does it also mean when God also is not resurrecting Black life? When God is, the demand then forgoes the state and onto the God that can actually deliver, right? You can actually resurrect life. But for some reason, there is no intervention happening on Black suffering. So what is then the stakes for political theology? What happens when not only the state doesn't meet our demands, but God isn't meeting our demands?
Okay, Becca, but Rob, let me ask, right? I mean, what does a resurrection look like? I don't know. We die, we come back. Where's Malcolm? I mean, maybe he's here. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm not even asking the deity to throw down on this one. I'm asking us to. Like, first we throw down and then we ask the deity, okay, what's your plan? But if we don't have a plan, you know, I'm not a theologian. I was in seminary. You say James Cone. Cone and Cornel West were my advisors, right? But when I walked into seminary, it's because I was coming back from Africa. I was like, okay, I'm in the continent. It feels different. I'm thinking different. I need more. So I go into seminary to meet the gifts of God. I leave early because the store isn't open. And what the heck? Why did it become a store? Because it's shaped like the academy. So we find the deity to the extent that we embody the deity. We bring back life. And I don't know, like, kids, the way you teach your 5-year-old, your 15-year-old, or you teach your students in the classroom, I don't know, but whatever they try to kill that is worthy and relevant to our freedom, that is what we bring back alive. Is that blasphemy? I don't know, like, strike me down now. I don't give a fuck. It's just like at the point, and I didn't really swear. I just made a gesture towards it. Like, look, at some point, because we've been struggling for decades, some of us, like 30, 40 years, it is your game now. You can't keep asking us questions, okay? Because if we were able to pull it off, we would have pulled it off because we love you so much. There are people inside who've been incarcerated for decades, right? Mumia is still inside. Sundia, they let you out. Russell Maroon Schultz, what? You have stage 4 cancer just before you die? They've been killing us while we've been breathing. We did not get them out. Is that like an impossible feat that only a God can do? Free the political prisoners, feed the babies? I don't know. I just don't know to what extent we ever decided to risk everything for agape.
Yeah, and I think that leads us to this part, which I'm now going to break into a 2-part question. Because on the one hand, I hear you, and I think this is ultimately the thing that leads you to the captive maternal, right? This love and care that is compounded upon by the state, right? Like you quote it as, every time we stabilize, the state builds upon that stability, right, for its own coherence. And then you pose a question back to us, right? Like you throw the alley-oop and you're like, so what's next for the captive maternal? And it's like you set up an impossible paradigm, right? Like you're like, so we're gonna stabilize, we're gonna free them all, right? We bust them out of prison, like you name in the talk, the architects of abolitionism that you did it's on YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. But you walk us into this impossible task, and then you then note that this resistance, this level of revolt, not only is Blackness capacious for it, right? Like we have the capacity because of the amount of endurance and suffering that we have to go through, but then we also have the state has the capacity, as long as we're stabilizing, the prisoners can produce the prison labor, right? As long as you all are okay and you take care of each other, then we'll be okay and you'll take care of the state. And so when you talk about agape, it's like, if love becomes the stabilizing force for the state to build upon that stability, then what is to be said of love? So that's the first part of the question, and then I'll move to the second part.
Okay, so I go to church. It's Zoom church, right? It's a Renaissance church in Harlem. So Pastor Jordan, it's a husband-wife, right? So Jordan's talking about agape as political will, right? I mean, there are different kinds of love, we know, right? Because we're in school or they made us read stuff. You know, there's eros, erotic, there's the familial love, there's like the fraternal, sisterly love, and others, right? But the agape is political will, according to Jordan, right? Because we have to love people we don't like, right? And I had to sit with that because I prefer to love people I like because it's easier. It's like, people I don't like, it's like, well, I don't have to be bothered with you. But the community has its contradictions. And the commitment to community transcends all forms of love, I would argue. Like the love you have for your parents or your partner or your partners, if you have multiples, the love you have for your kids or your kid, singular, plural, your comrades, right? That's because they give you something back. I mean, there's some reciprocity, what you hope on a good day, right? What does it mean to love people who maybe want to be capitalists? They want to work for ICE and be prison guards or something like. It's totally jacked up. It's like, oh my God, I'm supposed to what am I supposed to do with you? It's a form of love, but it's not the love of the marketplace. It's not the love of like, here's a master class on love. It's not the love of like, oh, we have a TED talk. It's not a narcotic. And it's also not, how do I say this? For Jordan, again, I'm still figuring it out, right? There's sacrifices embedded in it. Like what happens if we know we're going to lose even if we win, right? I mean, Jonathan Jackson, 17-year-old junior in high school, had a particular love for his brother. Did he keep him alive past a year? No. But that love has radiated over half a century and had a huge impact on me and my partner. who's a Panther and who said, because Jonathan did it as a teenager, I didn't have to do it as a teenager to get my older brother out who's in the Black Liberation Army and being tortured inside of some Tombs prison in New York. It's a sacrificial, like one of us does it. And now we know it's possible. Whether or not all of us will sacrifice, totally doubt it. Because we're being conditioned to shop and to also to shop in our own movements, right? You can make money off of Black suffering. We clearly know that now in the last couple of years, right? You can have like a rebellion and people march millions, and then it's like, some people got a ton of money. How did this happen, right? Because again, it's extraction, accumulation, and then sell it back. But still, we sacrifice because we don't want to buy simulacra. So this isn't a linear response and probably even clear to your query, but I will tell you what I know, and I will know till I transition. I have seen people love so much that they would die or be caged for decades. Do I love like that? No, I don't think I could pull that off, but I know it's real. So if they can do it, some deity or deities, could be Ogun, Oshun, Yemaya, don't care. It exists throughout time and space, and it's transcendent. And that is why the academy cannot eat your soul, because there is something greater than it, just as like there is something greater than the state that can take life but not restore it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just sitting with that for a second, because what you're setting up is a relationship between a very central claim in political theology, which is God is love, right? And then revolutionary love. And I think the entanglements there is just that what love requires, what it produces, what its capacity to transcend is always predicated upon Black suffering, right? So the capacity for the examples that you're using, for one to be caged because they love so much, or for one to stabilize the state because they love so much, is the very thing that it becomes the very vehicle by which Blackness becomes capacious, right? Like Blackness has the capacity to endure, and it puts in question the project of endurance by way of love for me, because I'm just wondering that if love is going to be this vehicle by which we have the capacity to transcend, and I wouldn't say transcend, but to endure and like maneuver the antagonisms that come with Black suffering because of the people that we love, then love also becomes the vehicle by which the suffering is durable. The suffering doesn't overdetermine the conditions.
I don't, okay. I gotta pause. All right, I want to go back to what Jordan, because I'm trying to figure it out like in real time, right? And again, I'm talking to you about my interpretation of people who've spoken to me or at me or whatever you want to call it. What hooked me with the church, right? The Harlem Church assertion, and because they collectively meet before they write their sermons. One person delivers it, but they collectively meet, right? There's a community. It's not specifically a hierarchy. It is political will. And I'm like, okay, what is, Tina Turner, what has love got to do with it, right? What has political will got to do with it? Maybe that's the endurance, like when you want to leave and you can't. You could, and clearly a lot of people have already left us. They just talk for us and about us, but they're gone. It's like, I'm out, and I'm going to cash in. It's an investment portfolio, right? But the people who are not afraid of Black suffering, and I get it. Why would anybody want to suffer? It's like, where's the exit door to this? And so people figure it and they hop the train or the plane and they're gone. And they'll hover and then explain our suffering to bourgeois whites, they're not really explaining it to poor whites. They're definitely not explaining it to the white supremacists who've come, up from the underground, above ground, and they're proto-fascists, if not full blown. They're just waiting for an opportunity, right? And they've got all the weapons. So, and I'm not even saying to get a weapon. I'm just like, again, I've said it over and over again. I grew up on a military base. I lived with an officer who's probably doing like destabilizing liberation movements around the globe. And I kind of watched them do their thing. And the level of violence that we're not prepared for is absolutely real. But we're not prepared, we're used like random cop killed you, horrible, choked you out in the street, horrific, no, there's strategic plans, right? Because that's how you get violence to produce. You don't deploy violence. I mean, you do if you're lazy in an unstructured way. I mean, if you're efficient, you figure out like, what's the greatest return I can get on this amount of violence? And what about the performative violence or using people as scapegoats or as martyrs, right? The state's capacity to intimidate you is based on its capacity to kill what you love. Freedom, family, honor, dignity, intellectual. Like they were like, we can wipe it out and then have you watch Netflix all day or something, right? So you would have to undo that capacity. And love, as any of those other loves that I defined, right, is insufficient without the political will. But I've never, like from kids to like seeing my parents transition, I've never loved anybody without suffering. So I'm like, so what was this about percentages? There's no way you love without suffering. Oh, you want to suffer that much? It doesn't. Okay, fine. Then love that much, right? But we know people who just their whole hearts open and burst. And then somehow all that molecular matter ended up absorbed by us. I tell my kid, they refuse to watch like Who Killed Malcolm X. They're like, this is too scary. I'm going to go listen to some rapper or something. It's like, okay, fine. But before they leave, I say, Malcolm loved us, right? And they're like, yeah, I know. And that's all they need to know. Then like 10, 20 years later, when they need to know that we loved each other, hopefully that knowledge will be useful.
I love that. We do have to move on because I could stay here all day because I'm like, you're working through my project for me.
Okay.
No, but okay, so I just want to stay on the captive maternal as the final question, and then we're going to move to Q&A. But this is another part of the dynamic of the captive maternal that you construct, and it returns to a statement that you made earlier regarding the gender wars. So interestingly enough, you have been positioned, your work has kind of been positioned as not only a critical intervention, a necessary intervention to Black feminist thought, right? But also a kind of alliance, a pseudo alliance, not on your end, but on their end, of what is burgeoning now as a kind of Black male studies discourse. And recently there was a social media kind of debate between Black male studies and Black feminists around the Black Panther Party, and how Black male studies was trying to insinuate that the critique of the Black Panther Party being sexist is rooted out of white feminism or, white supremacy. And so I want to return to the captive maternal because the captive maternal makes a critical intervention to discourses such as Black feminism and gender studies when thinking about the nature of anti-Blackness and predation, right? And you define the captive maternal as, quote, an ungendered phenomenon whose generative powers, which would be what we just discussed, love and care, have been stolen by the state, end quote. So can you expound on the nature of anti-Black violence and the issue of gender as it relates to Black feminist critiques of cis heteropatriarchy within our sociopolitical movements, which is to say that Black feminism makes an urgent critique of cis heteropatriarchy that we need to listen to, right? As it relates to our sociopolitical movements. But then you also make this turn in your research to political prisoners such as Erica Gardner, Emil Cabral, George Jackson, to discuss the function of captive maternals as ungendered phenomenons throughout history, And then can you discuss why it's important to think of the captive maternal and the capacity for love and care and stabilizing as ungendered or genderqueer rather than gendered? Yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks for that. So the Captain Maternal, right, what you said earlier, it came from being attentive. And I've said this before, watching people of all genders, non-binary, male, female, trans, provide services for the most vulnerable, which would be the child, or for the elder who's transitioning or just frail, right? The fragility. I think what freaks us out most, at least me as Black people, is I understand how much we suffer. I didn't quite understand how much we feel that suffering, right? And so sometimes knowing what that feels like makes you very protective of the children or the elders. Like, okay, I'm in the middle, like it's the fulcrum of the seesaw. I'm gonna just bring that garbage to me because I want to deflect it, from the other sectors who are younger or older and, frail and vulnerable in different ways. But the commitment to protect them is a guiding light until you start allowing them to be indoctrinated by the state and by capitalism. And then, once it's like, this is what Lori Lightfoot, the Chicago mayor, said last year, I guess, or earlier. Yeah, maybe it was last year. It was definitely last year. This is first month of this year. It was, people were like, control the spending in terms of hiring more cops. And I already told you how violent the Chicago people are, and meaning the cops, which you already know. And her position was, well, how would the Black and Latino people get into the middle class? So having jobs that are about policing and subjugating people becomes the vehicle for having money and economic stability. That, yes, stage one of the Captive Maternal view. I don't know if I would even let them in the door, but since I don't control the concept, people do whatever they want with it. I would say, yeah, we're full of contradictions. But remember, we've talked before. You keep moving on to those latter stages towards revolutionary struggle, and it could be pacifist, and some people are militarists. And I think sometimes feminists have problems with me because I don't like completely condemn the militarist aspects of it. But I will tell you again, I grew up in the military, and they were always at war or they're planning wars, and they were always invading somebody. So, it's not funny, but where's dad? He's in Korea, or he's in Vietnam, or he's in Panama, or he's like, in Detroit putting down a rebellion. Like, we have to choose whatever stage we're going to be on. You're either going to be complicit with the predatory state, which I called a hunter. You can call it whatever you want, or you're going to have to be its opposition. And that's the same with the academy. The academy has expressions of predatory behavior. It can also be a place where you can feed your people, your kids, and get healthcare. You're going to have to decide which side of the coin you're going to play to, right? So the captive maternal is non-gender. And I only figured that out because people ask me questions, like you asked me questions, and I'm like, oh, maybe I actually think this. So when I'm finishing a draft of The Womb of Western Theory, a trans intellectual who asked me to contribute is like, what's the gender of the captive maternal? Because you've written the whole thing and you've never, identified a gender. And then I realized, oh, because it's a function. There are women like, I'll put their name out there, like Condoleezza Rice, who's also on that like master class, but co-teaching with Madeleine Albright on something like diplomacy after they like devastated the Middle East, right? Like the false claims of weapons of mass destruction embargo that kills 500,000 children in Iraq. Like, they would never be captive maternals. They don't function that way. They function for empire. The one thing I can definitely say is, for me, the captive maternal, even if they play with empire, like I need this low-level job, because I got to feed my kids, get housing. If you're one of the architects, willingly architects, engineers for it, there's no way you're captive to it. You're an operative. Obama was the first Black imperial president of the US, not because he was captive, he wanted the job, right? And we can go from Obama to Kamala Harris all the way down. There's sometimes you have to take the job because you have to feed yourself and your kids. Those jobs are not called the president or the vice president of the United States. Like if you can get that gig, you don't have to take it. You can get another job, right? You can teach high school. It's this desire to be famous and powerful and wealthy that closes the door on the function. That opens the door to predatory behavior because you have the state and you have the capital backing you. It's like Bezos gives like what? Van Jones $100 million, and the Koch brothers pay him too. You know, Bezos and Amazon are eviscerating workers' rights, and the Koch brothers are just chewing through what's left of climate. We need water. We need clean water. We need air. So there's no way you can put, oh, they gave money for abolitionism and so I can roll with them. No, I'm sorry. You can, if you do, you're not a captive maternal. And I'm not judging you. It's just like clearly you don't function. There is actually a logic in this. And I'm just trying to be consistent, right? I'm not hating you. It's like, you know, there's a pimp and then there's a trafficked child. I'm sorry, this is my dichotomy in life right now. You're either a pimp or you're a trafficked kid, right? In need. So if I play along that spectrum and you're making money, then I'm like, clearly you're not captive to anything. Unless you were like, you know, spook who sat by the door, funneling those funds into some underground schooling, housing, buy land, feed people, you know, rescue all the Haitians and Africans they're deporting out of ICE to be, you know, killed in Haiti or wherever they're going back to. This is the last thing I know people want to talk about. Like, the older I get, the clearer I get. You cannot rehab this. You would not try to rehabilitate a gang or organized crime. You would simply say, y'all have to go, find another line of work. And that's the same situation we're in. And the state functions like organized crime, and everybody knows it. But I mean, do you want to have a strategy to deal with it?
You just like drop mic and then just like on to the next. So we're gonna move to Q&A. You have a few questions here in the box, quite a few. So I know we won't be able to get to all of them. So I'll try to pull a few that people can engage with you. So let's start with, I've heard Dr. James mention, oh, this is a good one. I've heard Dr. James mention in previous talks, discussions about betrayal stage to the captive maternal. I'm curious to hear if she could elaborate on what that is, especially in relation to what has been spoken about today regarding love. And I love this question because we've talked about the betrayal stage and I was like, look, you need another stage to the captive maternal. So yeah.
No, yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, take credit for that one. So you did like a year or so ago, is like, what about the stage of betrayal? And then maybe it wasn't you, but somebody else said like, well, we need to off the captive maternal. And I was like, oh, is it me? Like, stop. You know, like I have to change my address. No, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny because the truth of the matter is, I've said it before, the younger generation was betrayed by the older generation. We lied by omission. I was in Canada giving a talk a couple years ago, and it was mostly sisters, and they were in different works. I mean, like different fields, like the academy, dominatrixes. Is that a word? Like a real dominatrix, right? And I was just learning because like I grew up in an era where you cannot use the master's tools to undo the master's house, right? And then when I quoted that, I'm the oldest person in the room, right? And I keep getting the acronyms BDS or something like that, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions, right? But seriously, the sisters rolled back and they're like, we can use the master's tool. And I was like, wait, Audre Lorde said you can't. He said, we don't care. And then I was like, okay, people are improvising here. They plan to survive. And this is going to go back to our relationship with violence. So if, again, I'm trying to link it to off the captive maternal, it is not my preference, right? Because I'm implicated with my contradictions, but also I just want to be candid. You can't roll up on me and think I don't have a plan, okay? So it's just like not, like some people you should just leave alone because like they're not all grounded. in spirituality. But if we could agree as a community and hold a line of ethics, you cannot betray us. However you want to make your money or build your brand, you can't pimp us, right? Us being the collective movement who agree to be disciplined by agape and agree to sacrifice and suffer, not 100%, not every friggin' day, but to some degree, right? Because the idea of who we could be as free is greater than the reality of the minutia of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. So if we could agree, however respectfully, lovingly, I don't care what adjective you put it on, but that we will confront betrayal, then I would say, don't roll up on my house, but you can roll up to my campus and you can tell me I'm wrong. I don't care. And actually, half the time, I try to say this consistently, I don't have answers, right? But you have the right to criticize me without me going full blown that you're like a romantic or you're not grounded in reality, et cetera, et cetera. Because look, you guys are inheriting what we left you and our lies of omission. Like we couldn't tell you what we actually saw and knew to be the world, how violent it is, how predatory and unloving is, but still there's this beauty, there's this tenacity to love more and give more and risk more. I don't think we were ever clear about that with you. And definitely the academy is not clear because it has to make money and build its brand. So we lied to you by omission. Like, oh, people say, oh no, you're lying now. Whatever, I don't care. I'll just claim my part of it. There were things I wouldn't publicly say in a classroom or in a conference based on how violent I see the world, but I keep trying to gesture towards you. If I tell you I grew up on a military base, I'm not stupid about this, all right? And so, but I'm only talking about my father like in the last year or so. So it took me decades. Like I'll be like, oh, I was in Nicaragua during the Contra War and, met with Salvadorans who'd been macheted, what, Reagan's doing. Like there's so much horror that the US has exported around the globe that for us to recover, we would have to do something absolutely brilliant and breathtaking. And we will likely do it, but it won't be my generation. It'll be yours. So you have the right to say, you've betrayed us. And it's not cancel culture. It's like an analysis and it's astute because you have receipts or maybe you don't. But you understand how capitalism and imperialism work. If you can take Black suffering and cash in on it, that is betrayal. And in terms of the gender stuff, like really, do y'all really want to fight this? I mean, you have a right not to be turned into prey by anybody. And you have a right not to be battered or dishonored or humiliated by anybody. At the same time, you have to contextualize the personal abuse or the group abuse with the larger terror, which is that we're moving towards fascism and we came out of enslavement. Whatever we do to each other will never rival those zones of terror. We do need to stop, throwing broken glass and garbage at each other. And women, trans, LGBTQ, children, neuroatypical, all of those rights have to be respected. But let's be clear, everybody died for us, including cisgender men who were like probably a pain in the neck and patriarchal. Everybody risks and dies who is disciplined to agape. Agape is not the personal property of any gender or any sexual identity. Agape is the wild card, and not everybody will throw it down, even if you're the right intersectional identity that's supposed to be the leadership. The only people who lead are the people who commit. And the only people who commit are the ones who are willing to suffer and love simultaneously. That has no gender. How do I organize? I only want to organize with women because it's easier. But that doesn't mean all the women that I know are nice people or honest. There's no virtue in your identity construct. The virtue is in the capacity to love and to keep loving when people become a pain in the neck. And also, this is the last thing, and I'll stop talking. Everything we do for the last 400 years has been turned into a commodity. The gender wars is a commodity now. People are trading in it. It's a friggin' brand, right? And like, oh my God, like we're smart enough to know when we're being played, aren't we? But if we get too emotionally involved in this stuff, then it's like a crusade for what? Feed the kids, stop the devastation of the environment, and deal with the empire, as well as our relationships around gender, sexuality, the murder of trans women, the dishonor, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't isolate those and think that the empire is not playing you or cashing in on our conflicts. I'm not saying hide the conflicts, I go full blown open. I mean, I'll write about anybody, I don't care. Barack on down. But, well, you know, if we can't find the capacity, the political will, now I understand better what the pastor would say. We don't have to like each other. The political will means we have to love each other and we have to be disciplined. We don't have very much discipline right now. Everybody's doing that free range chicken stuff. I would discipline myself to a strategy if someone threw one out that I thought had integrity, and then I would want to tinker with it. But I would like, if you told me to shut up, I would stop doing these pod things or whatever these things are and just, you know, do my, whatever you collective said you should be doing this kind of work. I don't have a problem with that. But if people are building brands out of conflict, I don't have time for it.
Yeah, I think that's real, because there, on the one hand, there is like the brand of it all. And then on the other hand, it's a real antagonism that people suffer through, right? Like anti-Black gender violence is something that people actually die from. And I think to your point, there is a misalignment, referring back to the point that you made earlier around Patterson's notions of social death. Like when we talk about the function of natal alienation, it's not like we're actually getting at the critique of not only the family, but kinship, this idea of love. That what I think the critique is situating us in is that these formations, this discipline that you're calling for, becomes the impossibility because of the antagonisms, right?
Okay.
So what it
Okay, I think I understand, and I'm sorry that I wasn't more clear. You have the right to self-defense. That is not violence. Self-defense is not a synonym for violence. And I've talked about this with people I was in seminary with who went on to, you know, become directors in Harlem of these programs about intimate violence, family violence. A number of us are survivors. We're survivors of rape, we're survivors of beatdowns. We're like, no, you have the right to self-defense. But this, Rebecca, see, I could have led with that, and then we could have shortened the conversation. But that's prohibited to be public about that. Like, but I don't care right now. Like I don't care what it takes. Do what you need to do, but do it with your crew. And verbal, you know, back and forth, I don't consider that self-defense. You may see it as like some kind of armor, and yeah, go ahead and write and speak more. But no, the nitty-gritty is material reality. No, the nitty-gritty is a confrontation with violence. So if we won't do it with the state, right? We're going to do it with the domestic batterer. We're going to do it with the rapist down the block. I mean, this is the thing about strategy. See, you know, I left seminary early, maybe not just because it was a business, maybe because I may not be a complete pacifist. There's a strong possibility. So, and I wasn't trained. I said I was in ROTC for years. I'm not trained to be a pacifist, but I want to be a pacifist. But, you know, this is when on a podcast, they're like, George Jackson's a hyper-masculinist. How could he be a captive maternal? Because he loved people. But then he threw down, and then nobody can deal with he threw down. You have the right to survive without being battered, humiliated, sex trafficked, or raped. Disproportionately, it's women and children, trans women, cisgender, whatever. In the absence of having a public strategy and making it clear there will be a community response, we go to words. I mean, come on. If you want to throw down, I'm totally behind it, but then you throw down on every metric, not just to like stop rape. It's like, okay, what's the material plan without having to rely on the cops? Or therapy only? You would have to have a plan, and it would look a bit militaristic. So if you don't want to do that, I can only say after decades of writing about feminism and stopping rape and being in a lesbian dojo to like protect people, et cetera, I don't have anything else to say.
So let's go to the next question. There's a few in the chat. Here's one that says, can you speak to the role of celebrity in contemporary Black movements? I'm thinking about both the celebritization of academics formally that were a part of radical movements and members of the entertainment Burgess class. What does it mean, for example, Angela Davis and Cardi B to write a forward together, by example?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my assumption is that people want to be remembered. And the best way to be remembered is to be a celebrity. And being a celebrity is not the same thing as agape. So, I mean, it's a different function. It's like, it's not a Captain Maternal, it's a different function. But, you know, if you can, your claim to celebrity, and I'm not talking about any individuals like or collective, so you could put the people up on your fridge with a magnet, just deal with it. You know, like who you're talking about is sometimes the same folks I'm talking about, sometimes not. This society is driven by entertainment because it's a deflection. It's like, oh, look over there, it's bling, right? When what we really want to do is address our sorrow that we have to fight this hard. I mean, it's like freaking me out. It's like, oh my God, when does this stop? It doesn't stop, right? So I like the entertainment. It's like, oh, look at that. We're so cute and we get to be president and we get to be rich, or they're going to do a biopic or something like that. Okay, fine. That may make us feel like we have power. That's not power. That's distraction. The brilliant people I know, you don't know their names. And I'm sure you know brilliant people. I don't know their names, right? Because they're always behind the scenes. But here's the flip side of that. The most predatory people, I know we're not supposed to use the word evil, but the most violent people who structure military invasions and drone strikes, we don't know their names either. Like, so the people you need to know, you don't know who they are because they're behind the curtain. And so if you want to be entertained, maybe just say like 60 minutes a day, I'm just going to like do fluff. And I'm going to listen to the celebrities and the singers or whatever tell us how to organize a revolutionary struggle, which they, you know, they will look at from their mountaintop of their mansion, right? Or their embeddedness in white power. I literally said that. And I realized the places I teach are white power bastions. I mean, where do you think I'd be teaching, right? Because they like, we need a Black unicorn that looks like, we'll get that one, right? So I don't want to talk about them too much other than if there's a line where I can study them to track where we came from in terms of struggles and where we're going in terms of the mutation of the struggle into commodification. I only want to watch them to kind of figure out the trajectories. And look, whatever amount of money they have, they didn't write the script. Everybody works for white power. I mean, where do you think we are? Like, who do you think the funders are? How do you think certain people get out of jail or don't go to prison, right? So I don't want it to be a distraction, but they can be these moments of study to figure out, oh, here we are on the graph. Like we were like full blown rebellion, like half a century ago. And then like people got shot up and murdered and put in prison. And then the people who survived, like they had the right language, but then somehow now they're embedded in the Democratic Party. And then, you know, people are jet setting around the globe, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm going to say something really controversial, because that wasn't. We can't do it alone. And all the revolutionaries knew that. So like, what are the indigenous doing around Standing Rock? What are the white rebels doing? Other than, you know, they had Kyle Rittenhouse shoot them up, right, and walk for it. There's no way we can do, I know there's anti-Blackness everywhere. There's no way we pull this off solo. It will be revolutionary-minded lovers to revolutionary-minded lovers. It will not be an all-Black formation. That's why I led with the current mayor of New York City and the current police commissioner. And that will make it even more painful, because I just want to throw down with my people. But my people have already told me I'm a pain in the neck, right? And so any sincere gesture to move forward so that we leave you something that you're not just, you know, ripping your hair out like, what the heck is this? It makes no sense, means working with other rebels who love.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think the hard part is finding the rebels that are not anti-Black, but I get what you're saying.
I didn't say they were no, hey, there you go. I didn't say they were anti-Black.
Right.
It's a rebel's a rebel. I mean, if you can figure out like, oh man, that's an authentic rebel. I'm not saying like have dinner with them every Friday or invite them over to your house. I'm just saying they have a strategy and analysis.
Right. They're a means to an end. Yeah. Like,
well, I mean, I don't know if they're a means to the end, because they're in rebellion because they need, you know, you talked about the Captain Maternal. There was a Latina, her name is Margarita. Notice I speak in the past tense. She was a doctoral student at one of the UCs. She contacted me to write her dissertation on the Captain Maternal. I said, it's really like a Black thing, but she's like, no, I'm gonna do it. But the lack of support in the academy, the lack of support at home, she committed suicide. We depart, rebels go faster than anybody else. So our job is to keep them on the planet as long as possible because we need them.
So this is going to be our final question, but it really speaks to what you just said. I think what you were mentioning earlier, so much of critical Black thought has been focused around a particular agenda of Black life. And I think that kind of like hijacks people's capacity to be able to think critically about the things that they want to speak about. And so this question says, is there a way for institutional Black studies to embrace a thought of suicide? I ask this from a place of theorizing the university as a site of a plantation, where I think one can argue that Black studies has developed a neurotic attachment to the university that prevents it from embracing the abolition of the university.
I would say yes, but with qualifiers, right? I mean, I brought up Jonathan. I don't know why Jonathan haunts me, right? Not in a bad way. He's not a spirit I fear, but he's a spirit. I don't even know how to say it. I mean, because this is who he called it Newton at Jonathan's funeral, revolutionary suicide, right? And there's a complicated, like maybe people are supposed to offer backup, they didn't. California prison guards said, you know, stop all potential escapes. Doesn't matter if you kill everybody, which, you know, they did. They killed their white judge. And the same with Attica, you shoot through white guards who are hostages in order to kill Black rebels, because the worst thing in the world for a white supremacist empire is a Black rebel, right? And so, you know, I mean, I went to seminary in a faith in which political suicide is written into the whole scripture. I don't care what they call it. Like if you agree to go up on a cross, I mean, come on. There's some transactional thing going on there. It's transactional politics. Sorry, like, forgive me if I went there. But literally, like, I'm going to give up a life, beloved, you know, because you guys are going to live. And we do that every single day. It's like parents who don't have enough food in the house, give the foods to the kids, right? Or to the elder, or take that second, third job. right? Or work in the underground economies, which are really dangerous, because I'm going to sacrifice my life and dignity in various ways. So y'all get to live and grow up, right? So that's our inheritance. And for some people who are not us and who don't live under the conditions of terror that we live under, it looks like we're committing suicide in like small dosages or spectacular ways every single day. So, right, don't fear it, but comprehend it. And so, again, I mean, the suicide to having a happy family, the suicide to having a successful career. I mean, I can't explain to you how I got tenured or got to these spaces because I just followed the love of the mass in rebellion. And for whatever reason, the academy said, yeah, we can use something like that, but we're going to put it like in a petri dish or stick it in the freezer, whatever, cubicle. But I rarely wavered. It doesn't make me better than anybody else. It just meant that the reality of suicidal practices, and I'm talking not about like on pills or walking off the tracks or something onto the track, but the practice of sacrificing at this level is organic to who we are as a people because we've done it for centuries. We just don't have a narrative maybe that we want to hear. But Jonathan still follows me, right? And he's a comfort. And I'll say what my partner said, because Jonathan did it, I don't have to. We only need to know there are no limits in terms of possibilities, because there's no limit to loving in a slave camp. The love mutates. The more they bring the terror until they break us into the grave. And then the grave, we come back up like Emmett, right? Rosa Parks said, I believe, if I understand the history, she was thinking about Emmett Till when she wouldn't give up her seed. We die, but we don't die. We suicide, but we manifest. The point is to embrace each other enough that longevity becomes more of a practical possibility, but not the longevity because we sold ourselves within slavery. The point is to reclaim ourselves under enslavement.
I love this as a closing remark, particularly like in thinking theologically, because I love the juxtaposition between like the Christological story, right? You don't walk to the cross, but then you have Jackson, right? Jonathan Jackson. And I think this juxtaposition is important because there's like, on the one hand, in a captive maternal, right? As we think about Jonathan, like, this is my brother, I'm gonna go for it. And on the other hand, you have like Jesus saying, like, take this cup from me, right? And then his father also saying that, like, I'm gonna raise you up in 3 days. So the sacrifice is not as equal, right? Because Jesus, it's like, Jesus doesn't get raised up in 3 days, but Jonathan is like, I'm through this act, what comes of it, like with the memory of it, the place of it, go ahead.
I hear you, but I just said Jonathan was with me. Jonathan got raised. Here's the deal, because y'all are still younger. I'm moving towards my death, right? That's just how it works. That's the architecture. It doesn't change. So death, I mean, as scary as it is, it's the death of the body. I'm not even doing the religious thing right now. It's just like it came with the agreement. Like you can show up, but then you're going to go out. And you won't determine the time or place. And you wish you had have you ever, I have, watched an elder die? A mother, you came out of her body and then you're just trying to give a shred of dignity in these half-assed nursing homes because your brother's in charge of everything now. And people are saving money. It's like they're going to die anyway. Why are we spending like real money to make? It's like, it's maddening. But when they transition, they didn't leave you. Nobody who loves you, even if they hated you while they loved you, nobody leaves you. And that's why you transcend. And that's why you love. And that's why you are better than whatever garbage people try to shove down your throat. And that is why they will keep trying to kill us, but will never succeed. The soul, I don't even know what it is, but Jonathan keeps popping up. So it's real. And that's good enough for me.
I'm always honored to be in conversation with you and to sit in these very real moments of struggle, critique, and just discernment. You know, I think you have a stream of consciousness that's unmatched, and you are like one of the most profoundly incredible political critical theorists of our time. So I am grateful for this opportunity to talk to you.
I want to say last thing. It wasn't because you said nice things about me, okay? I love you, Rebecca. I don't know you, but I love you. And that works. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out, and I hope it will be recorded. I hope you all enjoyed it. Bye.